No, I was working out in a Nautilus place, and I thought I'd see how much I could bench press. And there was no one else in the gym, and I was pressing something about the size of a refrigerator, and I felt this.
The Australian outback is a place of extremes. Searing heat by day, icy winds by night, and a silence so vast it can feel endless. Out of this unforgiving land came a boy who would one day capture the imagination of the entire world. His name was Paul Hogan. Born in 1939 in Lightning Ridge, a dusty mining town famous for its opals and its grit, Hogan would go on to become an international star. His quick wit, earthy humor, and rough-around-the-edges charm made him an unlikely but irresistible figure on the global stage. To millions, he was Mick "Crocodile" Dundee, the charismatic bushman who could wrestle crocodiles with one hand and win over New Yorkers with the other. But while the cameras loved him and audiences around the world cheered for him, Hogan's private life was not the same kind of fairy tale. For more than 2 decades, he shared his life with Linda Kozlowski, the co-star who became his wife. Their marriage seemed to embody the magic of the movies, a real-life romance born from cinematic sparks. Yet behind the smiles, there were cracks. And when the marriage finally ended, Hogan revealed a pain more cutting than any Hollywood script could capture. Paul Hogan entered the world on October 8, 1939, in Lightning Ridge, a small outback town in New South Wales, Australia. Lightning Ridge was no glamorous birthplace. Known primarily for its opal mines, it was a place of dust, struggle, and perseverance. Growing up there, Hogan was shaped not by wealth or privilege, but by resilience, humor, and the rawness of everyday survival. His childhood remains relatively private, with few details documented about his family life, yet the environment itself tells much of the story. Australia in the 1940s was still scarred by the Great Depression and World War II. Families made do with little, communities were tight-knit, and children grew up fast. For Hogan, this meant developing a sharp tongue and an ability to laugh at hardship, a tool that would later become his signature weapon on stage and screen. As a young man, Hogan left Lightning Ridge for Sydney. There, he worked one of the most dangerous jobs in the country, a rigger on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. His daily tasks involved climbing dizzying heights, repairing steel beams, and balancing on narrow girders hundreds of feet above the water. It was not a job for the faint-hearted. Every day carried the possibility of death or serious injury, and Hogan often joked that it was the best training ground for not taking life too seriously. This gritty work did more than toughen him physically. It exposed him to a cast of rough, working-class characters whose quirks and humor would later inspire his comedy. High above the bustling harbor, Hogan learned how to laugh in the face of danger, how to spin a story, and how to win over mates with quick one-liners. At this stage, show business seemed a distant fantasy. Hogan wasn't following a polished path toward stardom. He wasn't trained, wasn't rehearsing in theaters, and wasn't dreaming of Hollywood. Instead, he was building scaffolds, patching steel, and raising a young family with his first wife, Nolene Edwards, whom he married in 1958. Yet fate, as it often does, had other plans. One bold decision would catapult him from the steel beams of Sydney to the television screens of millions. Paul Hogan's first brush with fame wasn't the result of careful planning or years of training. It came instead from a daring impulse. In 1971, he decided to audition for New Faces, an Australian television talent show that showcased singers, comedians, and would-be stars. Unlike the polished acts who usually graced the stage, Hogan wasn't a professional entertainer. He was a bridge rigger with a mischievous grin and a knack for spinning jokes. What set him apart that night was not just humor, but authenticity. His comedy was self-deprecating, cheeky, and distinctly Australian. Where others mimicked American or British styles, Hogan poked fun at everyday life, at himself, and at the quirks of working-class Aussies. The judges and audience erupted with laughter. It was raw, it was unpolished, and it was unlike anything else on television at the time. The performance struck a chord. Viewers connected with this ordinary man who seemed plucked straight out of the pub, cracking jokes about the very people watching him. Suddenly, Paul Hogan was more than a bridge worker. He was a rising comedian with something special. Television producers quickly recognized his potential. By the early 1970s, he was hosting and writing for The Paul Hogan Show, a sketch comedy program that became one of the most beloved shows in Australian television history. Hogan didn't just star in the sketches, he created them. His characters ranged from bumbling drunks to sly suburbanites, always played with a wink and an edge of satire. The humor skewered social norms, poked fun at politics, and celebrated the eccentricities of Australian life. Audiences adored him. The show became a cultural phenomenon in Australia, eventually gaining international audiences in places like South Africa. Hogan's quick rise from construction worker to television star felt like something out of a storybook. His cheeky larrikin persona, a charming troublemaker who didn't take life too seriously, struck a national nerve. Recognition soon followed. In 1973, Hogan won the TV Week Logie Award for Best New Talent, cementing his status as a household name. By the late 1970s, he wasn't just a comedian, he was an Australian icon in the making, and yet his greatest breakthrough was still to come. By the mid-1980s, Paul Hogan was already a household name in Australia, but he had bigger ambitions. He wanted to create a story that would put his homeland on the world stage. The result was Crocodile Dundee, a film that would not only transform his career, but also introduce Australia to global audiences in a way no movie had done before. Released in 1986, Crocodile Dundee told the tale of Michael J. Dundee, a rugged bushman from the Australian outback who finds himself navigating the bustling, chaotic streets of New York City. The premise was simple but irresistible, a fish-out-of-water comedy filled with cultural clashes, outback humor, and the kind of charm only Paul Hogan could deliver. Hogan didn't just star in the film, he co-wrote it, carefully shaping the character to reflect the very qualities that had endeared him to audiences back home. Mick Dundee was fearless, funny, and unpretentious, with a grin that could win over strangers and a toughness that could wrestle crocodiles. It was Hogan, distilled into a larger-than-life figure. The film was made on a modest budget of under $10 million, but it quickly became a global box office sensation. It grossed more than $320 million worldwide, an extraordinary feat at the time. Audiences from Sydney to New York fell in love with Hogan's character, and the film became one of the highest-grossing comedies of the 1980s. Critical recognition followed. Hogan won the Golden Globe for Best Actor in a Musical or Comedy and received both Academy Award and BAFTA nominations for his screenplay. Practically overnight, he had gone from Australian comedian to international superstar. But Crocodile Dundee offered Hogan more than fame and fortune. It brought him love. His co-star, American actress Linda Kozlowski, played Sue Charlton, the sophisticated journalist who falls for Dundee. Their on-screen chemistry was undeniable. Off-screen, that spark grew into something deeper. The film's runaway success spawned a sequel, Crocodile Dundee 2, 1988, which performed well at the box office, though critics felt it lacked the freshness of the original. Still, Hogan's status as a global icon remained secure. For millions around the world, he wasn't just Paul Hogan, he was Crocodile Dundee. And standing beside him, both on-screen and increasingly in real life, was Linda Kozlowski. While Crocodile Dundee catapulted Paul Hogan to worldwide stardom, it also changed the course of his personal life. On set, he worked closely with Linda Kozlowski, the American actress cast as Sue Charlton. She was younger, glamorous, and talented, with a warmth that complemented Hogan's easygoing charm. What began as professional chemistry blossomed into a genuine romance, one that seemed straight out of a Hollywood script. At the time, Hogan's personal life was complicated. He had been married to his first wife, Nolene Edwards, since 1958. Together, they had raised 5 children. Their marriage, however, had endured rocky times, and after more than 2 decades together, it collapsed in the early 1980s. The separation was messy. The tabloids feasted on it. and it was even labeled as one of the ugliest celebrity divorces in Australian history. Against that backdrop, Hogan's relationship with Kozlowski stirred headlines. The age difference, he was 20 years her senior, only fueled the media frenzy. Still, Hogan and Kozlowski ignored the gossip and focused on each other. To them, it was simple. They had found love. In 1990, the couple married in a private ceremony, far away from the glare of cameras. Their union symbolized a new chapter for Hogan, one filled with international glitz and Hollywood connections. Unlike his first marriage, which had been forged in the working-class suburbs of Sydney, this one was forged at the height of global stardom. For years, Hogan and Kozlowski appeared inseparable. They attended premieres, charity galas, and public events side by side, embodying the image of a glamorous power couple. Their bond seemed strong, rooted not only in romance but also in shared experience. After all, both had lived through the whirlwind success of Crocodile Dundee. In 1998, their family grew with the birth of their son, Chance Hogan. Becoming a father again in his late 50s brought Hogan joy and purpose. He often described Chance as a blessing, a grounding force in a life otherwise dominated by fame and scrutiny. From the outside, their life together appeared idyllic. A superstar actor and his beautiful co-star raising a child, splitting their time between Australia and the United States. It was a picture-perfect story. Yet, as with many Hollywood romances, cracks were beginning to form beneath the polished surface. From the outside, Paul Hogan and Linda Kozlowski seemed to have everything. They had wealth, fame, a beautiful family, and a love story that began with one of the most iconic films of the 1980s. But behind the smiles, subtle tensions began to creep into their marriage. Tensions that would eventually grow too large to ignore. Part of the strain came from Hogan's career. While Crocodile Dundee had been a colossal success, the years that followed were uneven. The sequel in 1988 performed well at the box office, but it was met with lukewarm reviews. Hogan continued acting, starring in films like Almost an Angel, 1990, Lightning Jack, 1994, and Flipper, 1996, but none reached the heights of his earlier success. By the early 2000s, Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles marked the end of an era. Critics panned the film, and audiences moved on. For Hogan, this decline was difficult. He had tasted superstardom, but now the industry that once adored him seemed to move on without him. Linda, meanwhile, gradually stepped back from acting. Though she had the talent and name recognition to continue, she reportedly chose family life and personal fulfillment over Hollywood roles. In some ways, their paths diverged. Hogan clung to the spotlight, while Kozlowski drifted away from it. Their lifestyles also added pressure, splitting time between Australia and Los Angeles, raising their son in the public eye, and juggling the demands of fame and family was exhausting. The 20-year age gap, though once insignificant, became more pronounced over time. Hogan, in his 60s and 70s, was at a very different stage of life than Linda, who was still navigating middle age. Friends and associates noticed subtle changes. The couple appeared together less frequently at public events. Linda, once radiant beside Hogan at premieres, grew more private and withdrawn. Rumors swirled in the tabloids, but the pair maintained a respectful silence. To the world, they were still the golden couple of Crocodile Dundee. At home, however, the cracks were widening. For all their love and shared history, the differences in lifestyle, career ambitions, and personal needs had begun to quietly erode the foundation of their marriage. By the early 2010s, it became clear that Paul Hogan and Linda Kozlowski's marriage could not withstand the growing differences between them. In October 2013, Kozlowski filed for divorce in Los Angeles, citing irreconcilable differences. For the public, the announcement was shocking. For Hogan, it was devastating. The split marked the end of a relationship that had spanned nearly 25 years. They had raised a son together, weathered the storms of Hollywood, and endured the scrutiny of tabloids. To see it unravel was, in Hogan's own words, like watching a part of himself disappear. "It was like the ground came out from under me," he later admitted. What made the divorce particularly painful was its timing. Hogan was already grappling with personal and financial troubles. Just a few years earlier, he had been embroiled in a prolonged battle with the Australian Taxation Office over alleged unpaid taxes dating back decades. Though he eventually prevailed, the ordeal drained him emotionally and financially. Adding a divorce on top of that left him battered. Kozlowski, for her part, described the marriage as stifling toward the end. In interviews, she hinted that their differences in lifestyle had become too glaring to ignore. "I found myself kind of stuck and unable to live my full life," she explained. While Hogan was content with a quieter, more reclusive lifestyle, Linda longed for adventure, travel, and growth. Their once complementary differences had become irreconcilable opposites. The divorce proceedings themselves were conducted with relative civility compared to Hogan's first split from Nolene Edwards, but the emotional toll was no less severe. The couple agreed to joint custody of their son Chance, who was 15 at the time. Hogan was determined to remain a hands-on father, even as he privately nursed his heartbreak. For Hogan, the true horror wasn't financial loss or legal battles. It was the emotional void. He confessed in later years that he felt lonely and hollow after the separation. While Linda quickly moved on, even remarrying Moroccan tour guide Moulay Hafid Baba in 2017, Hogan struggled to rebuild. In interviews, he admitted that he never truly got over her. "She was the love of my life," he once said, a statement that underscored the lingering pain. The media feasted on the story, portraying Hogan as a tragic figure, the once invincible Crocodile Dundee, now alone and frail. He withdrew further from the public eye, surfacing only occasionally for interviews or charity appearances. Friends noticed the toll the divorce had taken on him physically and emotionally. His once robust, jovial presence gave way to a man who seemed haunted by loss. The horrors of the divorce were not about scandal or betrayal, but about heartbreak. For Hogan, losing Linda Kozlowski wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the end of a dream that began on the set of Crocodile Dundee. A dream that for a while felt as if it could last forever. Paul Hogan's story is one of extremes, soaring highs and crushing lows, laughter that echoed across the globe, and silences that cut deep in the stillness of his private life. From the dusty outback of Australia to the glittering lights of Hollywood, he carved a legacy as the charming bushman who could win over anyone with a grin and a one-liner. But away from the cameras, his journey was far less carefree. The divorce from Linda Kozlowski remains one of the most painful chapters in his life. What began as a Hollywood fairy tale, a love sparked on the set of Crocodile Dundee, ended in heartbreak, leaving Hogan with wounds he admitted may never fully heal. His own reflections, raw and unvarnished, reveal the truth that fame and fortune cannot protect anyone from the agony of love lost. "Divorce is like surgery without anesthesia," he once said, and those words capture not just his pain, but his resilience in enduring it. Yet even in sorrow, Hogan's humanity shines. His devotion to his children, his ability to laugh through adversity, and his refusal to wallow in self-pity mark him as more than a movie star. They mark him as a man who has lived deeply, loved fiercely, and suffered honestly. Today, Paul Hogan stands as a reminder that legends are not immune to heartbreak. Behind every iconic smile lies a story of triumphs and scars, woven together into the complex, enduring legacy of a true Australian original.